The 2700 and 2700X are both 8-core CPUs from AMD's latest 2nd generation Ryzen. But what's the difference in performance? I've tested some games and run a few CPU benchmarks to help you pick between them. Let's start with the differences in specs. Both are 8-core, 16-thread parts with the same amount of cache, using the 12nm Zen Plus architecture. The main differences is in the clock speeds, where the base clock of the 2700X is 500 MHz higher than the 2700, while the max boost clock of the 2700X is just 200 MHz above the 2700. But both processors can also be overclocked too, as we'll see later. This difference results in the TDP of the 2700X being a fair bit higher than the 2700. To see how these differences practically affect games and applications, I've tested them both in this system. Both were tested using the Aorus X470 Gaming 7 motherboard with 16GB of dual-channel memory at DDR4 2666. And while I know performance could be further improved with faster memory, that wasn't what I had available at the time. In any case, the same memory was used, so we should be seeing the differences between the CPUs, which is the goal here. For the graphics, I'm using my EVGA GTX 1080 for the Win 2, as again, that's the best one I've got available. I've also used the stock cooler that comes with each CPU, as I've found them to be pretty good for stock coolers, and figure many people will probably end up using them. So the 2700X was tested with the Wraith Prism, while the 2700 was tested with the Wraith Spire. With that in mind, let's check out the games first, followed by CPU-specific benchmarks afterwards. I've tested all games at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K resolutions. However, this means I haven't been able to test as many games as I usually would. Starting with Far Cry 5 with the built-in benchmark at 1080p, we're getting really nice results at all setting levels, with the 2700X being quite a bit ahead here, around 13% better at ultra settings and 12% at low. Stepping up to 1440p, there's a little decrease in all frame rates, but not too bad yet. The difference between the two CPUs starts getting close together here, just under 5% of an improvement at ultra settings and a 6% boost at low. Going right up to 4K, there are almost no differences in average frame rates between the two, as the GPU takes over most of the work. The 1% lows are still a fair bit higher with the better CPU though. CSGO runs well on basically anything, and again, really nice results here at 1080p, with a 15% improvement at max settings on the 2700X. But this increases to a 24% improvement at minimum settings. Moving up to 1440p, the frame rates don't drop too much here. But at ultra settings now, the 2700X is giving us just under a 10% boost, while at low, this has dropped to a 20% improvement. The differences at 4K are much smaller, with a 5% improvement at max settings and an 11% boost at the lower settings. Ghost Recon was tested with the built-in benchmark, and at 1080p, we're not actually seeing much of a difference between the two CPUs. The results are already extremely close together here. The GPU was maxed out in all tests, so I'm guessing it was the bottleneck in this particular game. So just goes to show that it really varies depending on the game too. Moving up to 1440p, the results are about the same, very close together with an extremely small edge to the 2700X, but just a few frames per second. 4K in this game is pretty rough. The frame rates drop quite a lot compared to the other resolutions, but again they're still very close together, with the 2700 only just behind the X. In Watch Dogs 2 at 1080p, there was just a 4% improvement at ultra settings with the 2700X, and a slightly bigger 6% improvement at low settings. Moving up to 1440p, the frame rates at low settings didn't really drop down that far from 1080p. The difference was much larger in the 1440p results, and at low settings the increase dropped a little to 5% of an improvement on the 2700X now. Going to 4K drops things quite a bit, but the frame rates with either CPU are very close together here regardless of setting level. Perhaps a slight edge in the 1% lows to the 2700X, but otherwise they're not too different here. As expected, as we step the resolution up, there's less of a gap between the two CPUs, as the 1080 graphics card becomes the bottleneck. So there is a larger difference at 1080p, and generally at lower settings for the same reason. If you're planning on gaming at high resolutions, realistically the choice of CPU is less of a factor. But if you're playing at 1080p, then the 2700X could make more sense. To be honest, I could have tested better games to show CPU differences. I was planning on doing more testing with the 2700X, but my time with it was limited, and I didn't get to testing the rest. so I only had the data for the games shown. For the same reason, I also didn't get the chance to test overclocking in the games. Now let's check out the CPU-specific benchmarks. I was able to test at both stock speeds and while overclocked here. Keep in mind that the overclock speeds will vary between each CPU based on the silicon lottery, so results aren't guaranteed. I was able to get my 2700X to 4.25 GHz at 1.4 volts using the stock Wraith Prism cooler, while the 2700 was tested at 4.0 GHz at 1.4 volts using the stock Wraith Spire cooler. Starting out with Cinebench, we're seeing poorer single-core performance when applying the manual overclock, as single-core boosts will go higher than this. But we're seeing nice improvements on the 2700 multi-core result. It's really closed in on the 2700X. 7-zip was used to test compression and decompression speeds, and again the overclocked 2700 is able to catch up to the stock 2700X, while the overclocked 2700X puts it just in the lead. Veracrypt was used to test AES encryption and decryption speeds, and we're actually seeing slightly better performance prior to the overclocks in this particular workload, and the results are fairly close together anyway. Handbrake was used to convert a 4K video to 1080p, and then a separate 1080p file to 720p. Yet again, the overclocked 2700 is closing the gap between itself and the 2700X. Although the 2700X is a little ahead with its superior overclock. The Corona benchmark uses the CPU to render a scene, and fairly similar results to what we've already seen. Overclocking the 2700 closes the gap between it and the 2700X, although the 2700X is still ahead in all tests. These are the results in Geekbench 4, similar to before where the overclocked 2700 has caught up to the stock 2700X, but the 2700X while overclocked pushes it just further ahead. The Passmark 9 results saw the same pattern again, so I won't bother talking about them any further. In general, with the overclock on the 2700, we're getting a larger improvement compared to the 2700X, as the 2700X already has fairly high clock speeds. But we're able to push the 2700 quite close to it too, and in many cases get better results than the stock 2700X. But it will really depend on the overclock each chip is able to sustain. Although I didn't have time to test the games while overclocked, I suspect the difference would become much closer together with the 2700 overclocked. Unfortunately, temperature testing wasn't completed with the 2700X, again due to time constraints, so I wasn't able to compare the Wraith Spire and Prism coolers, although that would have been interesting. So overall, the 2700X is coming out ahead as expected with its higher clock speeds. But is it worth buying over the 2700? Looking at the prices, here in Australia the 2700 goes for $379 Australian dollars, while the 2700X goes for $469 Australian dollars. A $90 Australian dollar difference. In the US, the 2700 goes for $290 US dollars, while the 2700X goes for $320 US dollars. So only a $30 US dollar difference there, much closer together at just a 10% increase. In the games tested, at times we are seeing more than 10% of an improvement, more commonly at the lower resolutions anyway. So it could be worth going for the 2700X if you just plan on leaving it at stock. But as discussed, at higher resolutions, the differences shrink quite a bit. The 2700 looks like a pretty good deal if you're planning to overclock it to say 4 GHz for instance, which as shown should get you just a bit less than the 2700X. Personally, if I had that US pricing available, I'd probably just spend a little extra for the 2700X. But either are realistically pretty good options as we've seen. Unfortunately, I'm in Australia so have that bigger price gap, which makes the 2700 seem like a better deal, at least in terms of price to performance. Let me know which of these two CPUs you would pick and why down in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for future tech videos like this one.